commitment to make her life count. Her work has crossed different disciplines ranging from early childhood development, family violence prevention, senior services, addressing poverty, transportation, and healthcare. She has donated countless pro bono hours towards building the capacity of local nonprofits and is now running for County Supervisor District 2. Rochelle has a bachelor's degree in social work, a master's in organizational development, and is working on her dissertation at the George Washington University. That part I didn't know. Congratulations. She is the CEO of Potentiate, a board of leadership consulting firm, and has received numerous recognitions for her work. Please welcome Rochelle Sherlock.
It is such a joy to be here and to see all of you. You know, one of the things that I am always intrigued by is the mysteries of our lives, right? The mysteries of how we feel, how we think, how we experience life differently, the assumptions we make, our beliefs, and then the actions we take. You know, I'm always fascinated by our stories. You know, there's a lot of stories in this room. I don't know how many people are here in this room, but how our stories intersect, cross, parallel, and some places where our stories reach back in through the generations and back into history of where we really began. And so early on, I wanted to understand my story, and so I'm going to share a little bit of my story with you. And I want to begin actually with a 15-year-old wild, rebellious teenager who was so wild and rebellious that her parents institutionalized her because they couldn't control her. She was about 14, 15 years old. Her name was Dorothea, and Dorothea ended up becoming pregnant as a teenager and became a teenage mom. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, because my story, and where I think sometimes it begins for me, is actually when I was 4. I became a member of the Me Too movement when I was 4. It's one of the earliest memories that I have. But if I was to characterize my life in some ways, because it's not all doom and gloom, it's really like a mix of Little Miss Sunshine and Mommy Dearest with a little bit of Glass Castle sprinkled in there. Because my life was whimsical and wild and creative and exciting and dysfunctional, chaotic, traumatic, and there was all of these things woven in together, and it's given me this deep appreciation for who we are as human beings and the complexities that we have in who we are. And how do we come to terms with those complexities? When I was 6, we were driving along, my mom was driving the car, we were driving along a windy road in the mountains, and we were, I don't know, my side was on the side of the cliff, so I don't remember if we were going up or going down, but what I do remember was the steep precipice that was on my side of the car. And my mom was driving really, really erratically and speeding, and I was terrified. My younger brother and sister were in the back. My sister was a baby, and they were crying. And they were crying hysterically, and I was crying. And as I'm hanging on to the side door, and I'm looking through the window out the side, my mom's yelling at me, and she's saying to me, "You want to kill yourself? I'll kill us. I'll take us all off this cliff right now in this moment. I'll take care of that. You want to kill us? Kill yourself? I'll make sure I take care of that." And I was hanging on to that door, looking out that window, looking at the cliff, knowing that it was going to be my fault if we went off that cliff. And I begged with her, "Please, Mommy, please, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mama. Don't. I don't want to die. Please, Mommy." This went on what felt like an eternity. As she was yelling and distraught and angry, and she began to pound the dashboard of the car. And she was so enraged as she's pounding the dashboard of the car and driving all over the place. And I was sure that our lives were going to end there. And I'm begging, looking back at my brother and sister behind us, knowing that this was my fault that we were there, begging. Well, obviously she didn't drive us off a cliff that day. But the true tragedy about that is that the reason why she was angry and threatening to kill us is there had been an incident, and I was all of 6 years old, where I had threatened to kill myself. And rather than try to understand what was going on in my life that would lead me to that point, her life was already in chaos. And so it just tipped her over the edge and where she needed to go ahead and not needed, she just raged because her life was already so out of control. So something more sinister was happening to me, and there was a family member who had been molesting me and also who was abusive, physically abusive to my brother and myself. And so we were left alone one particular time with this individual. And in order to get this person to stay away from me, it was in a kitchen, and he started to come towards me, and I just grabbed the knife and like, stay away from me, right? Stay away from me. I'm going to stab you. But he was bigger than me, so he laughed. Kind of this like little sinister, evil laugh. Yeah, right. Blew me off. And in that moment, I knew that I couldn't overpower him. So what I did was I took the knife, butcher knife, and I put it to my chest, and I said, if you come near me, I will thrust this through my heart, and I will kill myself right here, and it'll be your fault. So that stopped him. Maybe, he could laugh and overpower me with the knife if I was coming after him, but the fact that I was willing to turn it on myself was enough to stop him. The irony is, he turned around and he told her later that I tried to kill myself. Of course, he left out all the other kinds of details of this experience. And in the moment when I was in the car with her, what I learned was it was not safe to not be okay. It was not safe to be vulnerable. And I learned that it was important to be silent. Forgive my chicken scratch here, but so I became cloaked in silence. Silence of all the abuses and all the chaos that was going on in our family. I was the oldest child, and as the oldest child, I felt this immense responsibility for my younger brother and sister. So not only was I cloaked in silence about what was happening to me and to them, but I was also the one that was trying to protect them, all of us. So what happens is, in this kind of chaotic, crazy world that I grew up in, that's traumatic, this is my story. I know you all have your own different stories, and there may be some similarities or different ways in which you've been touched and impacted with your early experiences. But for me, what happened was I had to be tough. I couldn't be vulnerable. I had to hold it all in. I was safer alone than I was with others. So I became more reclusive. I was a fighter. We lived in some really rough neighborhoods, and so I had to I was actually protecting the victims from the bullies, because I felt like it was not okay for others to dominate and hurt other individuals. So when I was about, I would say probably 8 or 9, my mom brought this woman to our house, this older woman to our house, and her name was Dorothea. And Dorothea, I'd never met Dorothea before. I'd never met Dorothea before because Dorothea was my mother's grandmother, and she was dysfunctional. She was the one who was so wild and out of control that she was institutionalized. She was the one who had a child as a child, and that child, my mother's mother, ended up put in foster care as a result of that dysfunctional environment that she was raised in. So Dorothea came to our house. I was about 8 or 9 years old, and there was no place for her to sleep. First time I ever met her, and you notice I call her Dorothea. My grandmother I'll call Betty, because they weren't in my lives. My mom was doing the best she could to protect us from her own experiences, but here's what I know to be true, is that our stories don't begin the moment we're conceived, or the moment that we're born, or the moment we have our first memories, or the moment we become a teenager, or the moment we become an adult and we have this choice. Our stories really go back often in generations, and they shape our experiences and the way we view the world and who we become, our sense of our identity. So Dorothea's here, and she's in this room with me, and so first of all, she exposed me to some things I'd never been exposed to before, just in terms of the stories, so she was quite the shocker. But one day, she was only with us for a couple of days, and one day we went shopping. We just went and walked down. It was not too far away from where we were living in this apartment, and we went shopping, and it was a nursery. We're walking through this nursery, and Dorothea is talking to this man, and I'm just hanging out with her because, what does a 8, 9-year-old kid do? You just hang out with this older lady who was your great-grandmother. And next thing I know, we're chatting. She's having a good time chatting. We go back home, And my mom goes into a rage. Now, I want to tell you something about my mom. My mom was beautiful. Beautiful in that she just had this zest for life. She really did. She was amazing in so many ways. And I just had this incredible admiration for her. But she was somebody who was deeply wounded, deeply traumatized. And what would happen is the life circumstances she was in as an adult, as my mother, were just unstable enough that it would send her into rage as she would fight against it to try to control her environment, which then, of course, ended up traumatizing us. But Dorothy and I are back at the apartment. My mom goes into a rage. She's yelling and screaming at Dorothea, and she picks up the house cat, and she throws the cat over Dorothea's head. She was so angry at her, and then she threw her out of the house. Well, it turns out Dorothea, my great-grandmother, was a prostitute, and the guy at the nursery was a John that she was picking up while I was with her. So, as you can see, these kinds of threads begin to weave through our lives. My mom's mom, who was in foster care, she was raised by foster parents, and when my mom's first couple of years of life, she actually, probably the best years of life she ever had, she was in a farm in Michigan, living with her foster grandparents, because her mother was a teenage mom, and also because of the dysfunction and the chaos, she was dysfunctional and chaotic. She was also a drug addict, had a lot of other kinds of things that were going on for her. So when those grandparents passed away, my mom was forced to go live with Betty and experience all kinds of other traumas herself. So one of the things that happens in all of this with the rage and the fighting and the chaos, we were naturally attracted to people who were kind of chaotic, right? That's the only thing we knew. That was the environment. And as a result of all that rage, and a result of all of the times that my mom would tear the house apart, I became cloaked in fear. Fear of what would happen if I stepped out of line. Fear of what would happen from others. A lack of distrust of anybody that came into our lives that we didn't know. Over the course of time, because as many of you probably know, predators smell wounded animals. Right? So my Me Too movement experience started at 4, but unfortunately it actually had multiple perpetrators over the course of my childhood. And as a result of that, then I ended up being very much cloaked in shame. So these things shape who we are. But there's something that's also beautiful in the broken places of who we are. Because in that place, I found compassion for my mom. I learned that so much of who we are isn't necessarily always about our choices, but oftentimes about our circumstances that may be out of our control. And how do we begin to change those circumstances in a way that allows us to not only be compassionate and loving with someone else, but to be compassionate and loving with ourselves. We moved 31 times by the time I left home, not because we were in the military, but because we were kind of American nomads, and because of the chaos, it was easier and more comfortable. My mom would get bored, we'd pick up, we'd travel, we'd move someplace. As a result of that, I actually never completed an entire year at a school until I was in about the 5th or 6th grade. This meant that when I would go to the new school, they would be in a different subject or in a different location. This meant that I was always struggling to try to catch up. So I struggled in school and I got C's and D's. I actually had this belief that I was fundamentally stupid. So there goes the self-esteem, the self-doubt, the self-criticism, the self-loathing. All of those things that shape who we are, but none of it, absolutely none of it was true. Because you know who I was and you know who I am. I was this curious, adventurous child who had incredible capacity for wonder, for compassion, for action, for protection. Some of that got cloaked. But as I discovered with my mom, I was the oldest child, so I ended up parentifying her, and so I kind of took care of her too. So a lot of times as I got older, it was me taking care of her. But as I learned that, I understand and I got perspective. And as I got perspective, I began to realize that, you know what? Maybe I'm not stupid. maybe this isn't about who I am. Maybe this is about the experiences that I had. And so when I finally had an opportunity to go to school, I worked really, really hard. Guess what? In college, I got A's and B's. My teachers would say, you're the top 1 or 2 of my class. And I'm like, oh, no, you're crazy. This is a community college. No, you know what? You're not grading hard enough. Sorry, you're just being nice to me. I mean, I would rationalize because I always struggled in school with all the chaos and, and always never kind of coming in at the right place. So I just thought that I wasn't an intelligent, capable human being. It wasn't until probably in my master's program, actually really probably about 7 years ago in my doctorate program, when people from all around the country are saying, wow, Rochelle, you really understand these concepts, that I was been able to kind of go, hey, I'm an intelligent, capable, smart woman. But it's interesting how so many of these things shape who we are. The fear began to come off when I began to have compassion for myself and began to make sure that I acted in ways that gave me hope into the future. What this meant is that if I was afraid that there was no good, decent human being in this planet, then I was going to be that good, decent human being, right? I was going to act and prove to myself that, yes, somebody could do things that were nice and kind and loving and compassionate and do it for the right reason. And I was going to do it with integrity. And so as I began to do that, and I found that place in myself, then I no longer was as afraid. The shame comes, and I think shame is one of the hardest things to get rid of when we have these difficult experiences in our lives. And it really has a lot to do with thinking that this is about who you are, as opposed to this is about something that happened to you. So the shame actually has peeled off slowly over the periods of time, partly through study, partly through trying to process information. The studies, and I've actually done a tremendous amount of research. You know what the research says? Research says victims go to survivors to thrivers when they actually integrate their experiences, take perspective, take a look at their experiences from the place of, this is not about me, how can I incorporate this? How can I add meaning to this in my life, right? So I added meaning to this in my life when I made the decision that I was going to make my life count for something, that I was going to serve others, that I was going to make sure that I made the world a better place for people. And in doing that, it actually enabled me to embrace all of those experiences as a way to empower me to be more effective and to persist and to be mission-driven, to drive, to make that difference, to make other people hopefully have better experiences than my own. Clearly silence. I'll tell you a funny story, actually. So when I was in high school, because I just guess I had this deep curiosity, and even then I was out to change the world on some level. I was bringing home every stray dog I could find. If there was a drunk in the streets and it was raining, I'd be bringing the drunk home and trying to, let's feed this person, let's take care of this person. I don't really know where that came from, but that's just what I was always doing. So there was this high school debate, and they brought all these high schools together, huge auditorium, and there's various topics that they gave us in our groups. And they're like, okay, so you need to talk about what your position is on impeachment or whatever the case may be. Well, I was so excited about the ideas that my teammates had because they knew the subject matter. I didn't, because I had been moving around. I didn't have all of that knowledge, but I was so excited about what they were saying. I said, this makes a lot of sense. So when it came time for all these different groups to kind of come up to the debate stage, I volunteered my group. I'm like, I'm sitting with the best, smartest women and kids here. You know what? We're going to go, and you're going to, right, get up. Everything you said, you're going to get up. And they looked at me, and they're like, oh, no. This is you. You're up there. So I had to go, because I volunteered our group, and stand in front of an auditorium of, I would say, probably 200 to 300 high school students. Now, you all know how brutal high school can be. It's brutal. I didn't know the subject. I didn't know the subject. I was just excited about it. And so I got up there and I started, rambling something that was probably nonsensical. And in that nonsensical ramblings, the audience literally started to boo. They started to boo. They started to do the kind of calling me names and shouting at me, etc. Because they were brutal. And I blew it. I really did blow it. That was kind of silly of me. But a teacher said, you know what? Shame on you. She came up here and had the courage to speak. She has the courage to get engaged and to make a difference. So shame on you. Ironically, sorry for a little bit of the emotion today. It's always hard to share my personal story. But ironically, I actually do a lot of public speaking now. And I work a lot with groups. And I'm really comfortable with groups. But I never let that experience stop me. So there's a lot of cliches that we hear in our lives, like try again, right? I don't remember exactly the Eleanor Roosevelt, someone can't make you feel small unless you allow them to do that. All of these kinds of cliches, really, there's elements of truth to that. Because I would at some point in time decide, okay, I failed. What can I learn from that? How do I grow from that? What can I do differently next time? And I would fail again, 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 and I would keep reminding myself, it's a journey, not a one-time you fail, you get up, and you succeed, right? It's really a journey about who we are and how we integrate ourselves and become something that we want that can maybe make a difference. A couple of things. I would say early in my life, I learned to be tough. So I was a tomboy. I was a pretty tough girl. I could have been a biker chick. Thank goodness that didn't go that way. I wouldn't be standing here now. But I could have been a biker chick because we lived in some really rough places. I was a tough girl, and I wasn't going to let anybody. As soon as I was old enough, I wasn't going to let anybody do anything to me, and I was going to take them down and take them out. And that really was a way. I've got that inner strength, so that was a good thing for me. Where was I going with that? I forgot there for a second. But anyway, I was going to be super tough, and I was going to challenge things. Where was I going with that? See, here I am. Here's another failure, another mistake. I don't remember where I was going with that. I'm sorry. Yes, I do. I learned not to cry. Crying was a sign of vulnerability. I didn't learn to cry until I was in my mid-30s. In my mid-30s, I started doing work. I ended up having a son. My marriage, I didn't want to have children because I thought I would be my parents, my mother, and I didn't want to repeat this. This intergenerational stuff I didn't want to repeat. So I started doing personal growth work and trying to work on my own vulnerabilities. And one of the things that I found was doing a daily gratitude journal. So when life felt really bleak and overwhelming and there was still so many challenges, because we also, we were in and out of poverty. I was homeless for 3 months. We can't. The good news about all that is my mom had a way of spinning things and making it an adventure. That's kind of the Little Miss Sunshine glass castle kind of magic that she would bring in, so it didn't seem so bad. But that was the experience. As I learned to appreciate the things that I had, even when it was such a challenge, then all of a sudden my life and my heart opened up. The other thing research tells us is random acts of kindness bring love and joy into our lives, and it expands us. It opens our hearts. So when we make that connection and we serve someone else, then we have the experience of ourselves as being beautiful and strong and capable and loving and powerful. And they have the experience of that human kindness and that human connection. Let's say that the last thing, when we start thinking about our own journeys and our own challenges, but we also start thinking about the way we affect others, one of the number one things that we need to do is we need to uphold one another, support one another, encourage one another. Because it's actually through the social networks and the relationships that we can heal and that we are the strongest. And research repeats that over and over again. And I think the biggest thing that I worry about in our country and in our society is that we have become so fractured from those relationships that it's hard for us to have the communities that we used to have maybe generations ago. But we need that. And when we have that, then we can all excel, we can all lift up, and we can all actually enjoy the benefits of that human connection and compassion. So I'm here not because my story was so tragic. I'm actually here because that tragedy has empowered me to be a voice and to be fiercely focused on making a difference for the community. So with that, I would just say thank you, and thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you. I didn't get to hear, but I'm sure it was amazing. You're amazing, and I've heard your testimony before. It's very touching. And what I wanted to do was I don't know if you've already done this, was to kind of do something interactive here and just maybe open it up for some questions or some conversation, some discussion on some of the things that we've heard, some of the things that you spoke about. Maybe in part of your testimony, kind of sharing with us one of the most, and I don't know if you already did, but one of the most significant things that happened that really was impactful, and the reason why you chose to share what you did specifically today with this group today.
Sure. You mean one of my life experiences that restate that for me, because that's actually...
Yeah, so like when you decided to share exactly what you shared today, what was the insight for that and sharing what you, like something that was significant standing out for you?
So, here's the thing.
We walk around and trauma is invisible, right? So we look at one another and we make all kinds of assumptions about each other's journey. People can take a look at me and go, oh, she's a professional, she owns her own consulting firm, she must have had a blissful life. And never fully do we ever see people for who they are and all of their experiences and complexities. For me, and particularly for so many of us, we know that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men have a Me Too experience. So that trauma stays with us, but it doesn't have to define us in its totality. What it does, though, is if we can come to terms with that and embrace that and bring it into ourselves, then I think we become all the stronger for it. The Japanese, and I don't remember the name of it, but they have this process. If a teacup breaks, they actually will fill in the cracks with gold. They make it stronger and more beautiful in the broken places. I would say to you that my life would be very different if I didn't have those experiences. I might have been a scientist or a biologist just based on my natural interests, and I wouldn't have made this impact or be working so much in the field of people and trying to make a difference for people. But the places that I think and I love the most about me really are my compassion and my perspective. And so it's part of embracing that, but also recognizing that, boy, you know what, if you know someone who's experienced trauma, they may always look like things are going great, and at times things are always going great, but it doesn't mean that that always completely disappears, and it's not absent in who we are. It's how do we integrate some of that in who we are so it no longer defines us.
Thank you. Appreciate that. How many of you feel like you can relate to some of the things that Rochelle spoke with? I know that I certainly can. Can I have a couple of volunteers maybe just offer up something that resonated with you personally today? Somebody want to share something that resonated? Lorraine?
I'll share one.
Thank you.
So, in 2014, my dad passed away of cancer. Not suddenly, he had cancer. He was fighting for about 5 years, but suddenly to me, because it was so just instant. And then the next year, my husband's dad passed away suddenly. And then the next year was going okay, and right at the turn of the year, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And we helped her fight for that 1 year, and she made it 1 year. And then the next year, she passed away with cancer. She was my best friend. And so where I relate is that I felt like during that time, those 5 years, and no one really knows this about me either, because it's just stuff that goes on besides the people that I do trust. I felt like I was completely messing up my kids because I felt like my life was completely out of control, and I didn't know how else to manage them besides just being that super, kind of like what you were saying, your mom did not quite at that capacity or at that level, but I just related to that so much because I remember feeling like that. Everything's out of control. I had, like, my dad passed at a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old, and a 3-year-old. My mom passed, and they were, 7, 5, and 3. So, those ages are hard anyways, and so just trying to keep it together, I constantly felt like a whirlwind, completely out of control, and was afraid, kind of like what you're saying, just passing that down to the next generation, and just being like, they're going to see my rage, I have to grieve, while being a stay-at-home mom with them, where do I cry? Where do I scream? Where do I do this? And it's like, so much of it had to happen kind of with them there, So what happened? I would lock myself in my room. You know, these things happen. My husband works at a hospital. I couldn't just stay home all the time. And now I don't have parents to help me, you know, so it's just I'm a sister. But what you were saying just really resonated because that's really hard to come out of. And I just feel like this past year or so, I've come to what you're saying of being like, you know what, this is part of my story, and I don't have to just fight against it and feel like out of control, but let it turn me from, you know, feeling like a victim to a survivor, and now I'm able to thrive. And so I love what you're saying. It was amazing.
Thank you for sharing.
Very touching, and I know that speaking with, to your point, I've had the privilege of sharing part of Lorraine's journey of her losses just through Facebook and getting to know her more, because she's, one of the things I love about Lorraine is she can be very transparent in how she's feeling and where she's at in life and what she's supporting, what she needs support with, and I appreciate those women in my life because it makes me realize too that we're all real, right? We're all, we all have emotions and feelings, and we can't always just live this, you know, perfect, happy life that we'd love to, but we grow empathy from that, from those things. We develop empathy because we've gone through those experiences. So thank you for being transparent for us too, Lorraine. I'm one who appreciates that in you as from woman to woman.
And can I just say something real quick on this? Is I think so often we leave ourselves, each other alone in our grief, right? And if we can stop leaving each other alone in our grief or in our challenges, right? So we live in a world where we have to pretend like everything's perfect all the time. Social media makes it worse. But, you know, that's not the totality of who we are. And so I thank you for sharing that, because I think it's the loneliness sometimes that's really hard for people who have experiences like yours and like mine and like others.
You know, this morning at 4:30 this morning, I shared this with my mom only, but at 4:30 this morning, I was up getting ready for the day. My phone went off, the messenger, and this young girl had reached out to me. I friended her on Facebook, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. She'd requested, and I saw that we had mutual friends, and she looked like she might just be just out of high school, maybe early 20s. And there was just something that I was drawn to her with, and I wasn't really sure what it was. So this morning I get this ding on my phone at 4:30, and she says, "Hey, I know that we've never talked before. Do you have a minute? I'm feeling really lonely." 4:30 this morning. And I said, "Sure, what's going on?" And then I said, "Hi, you know, thank you for reaching out, so and so." And absolutely, of course I've got time. How can I help you? What are you doing? And she says, "I'm feeling suicidal. And nobody wants to believe me, and they think it's for attention," she says, "and it's not, and I don't know who else to reach out to." This girl has never met me in person. I've never met her. But there was something in her that was drawn to me, and something in me that says, answer this young lady's message at 4:30 this morning. Was I tired? 100%. Was I busy? 100%. But I was not too busy to answer the call of a young woman who needed me, right? So I spent a little bit of time with her, explained to her that sometimes we just need somebody to listen, and I will listen all day long right now if she needs me to. And I did ask, can I reconnect with you this afternoon? You will have my undivided attention. And she said, yes, please. And then she continued to send me a list of all these antidepressants and medications that she's on as a young adult woman, explaining to me that she's bipolar, and explaining to me that she's got learning deficiencies, and explaining to me all these things. Not one thing in what she said to me did she find any value in herself that she expressed to me. So wrapping up to the point of sometimes we're not, that's not embedded in us, and for some reason we're taught to believe that it's okay to just rely on these medications. It's okay to rely on in our own heads and our own self-thoughts and those limiting beliefs. So to that point of developing and growing and learning how to change what happened to us from victim to success, right? Yes. To really, really overcoming that too. So I mean, it happens at all times, and so that's what I wanted to share about that this morning.
You had your hand up?
I'm Ann, and what I have to share is I came from an alcoholic family. My dad was an alcoholic, and I married an alcoholic, a raging alcoholic. And so I had gone to this women's support group, and the gal running it was a recovering alcoholic. So she kind of realized what was going on with me, so I went into a recovery house for a few months to get clean and sober. And it was the best thing I ever did, because you know what? I found myself, and I have other people in AA that support me and have, really good friends. So I know even though there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that's what you have to look for sometimes. made it through.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.